Good morning. How's everybody doing? Okay. All right. Volume okay for everyone? All right, good. Name's Dennis Ray Kinder. Most of my friends call me Ray. I go by my middle name a lot, and so you're welcome to call me that. I work at Children's Resource Group, also known as CRG. We're a multidisciplinary mental health group. We see kids, adolescents, and adults, and we are about to celebrate our 20th year this fall, so hopefully that means we've been doing something right. And we have psychiatry, psychology, therapists, speech and language therapists. We do a lot of testing and assessment, and that's kind of our model, to do a lot of testing and assessment on the front end. And we have school psychologists that help us with that, and we have a secondary educational specialist and an assistive technology specialist. So, and they help us with educational planning for our kids. One of those school psychologists and I, 2 years ago, her name is Nancy Lindgem. Some of you may know her. We were in a discussion about bullying. And in our office, we were seeing that on the increase, not on the decrease, and that was concerning. We see victims and their families, we see perpetrators and their families, and we see bystanders and their families. And it is ugly on the back end. Very costly emotionally for everyone involved. You can imagine being the parents of a victim, but if you put yourself in the role of the parents of the perpetrator, of the bully, that's a tough spot as well. And I've seen families of bystanders really worried because they and their child are afraid they're going to be next. So ugly on the back end. And so Nancy and I were talking, this is a problem that as a community we have to get on the front end of. And that's where time, effort, and energy needs to be placed. And so we put together, we were kind of the catalysts for putting together a prevention of bullying symposium, creating a culture of acceptance, that was held March 9th at the Convention Center. We got good support from the community. A lot of community agencies helped us pull that together, including Peace Learning Center, the Children's Museum, Butler, and the Marion County Prosecutor's Office, and just to name a few. So we were very pleased about the turnout, and I am so thankful to be here today, because what this tells me, with this audience, with you being here, is the momentum is continuing to grow around the theme of prevention. And that's where we've got to put our efforts. So, today I'd like to talk a little bit about the psychological and emotional impact that that's having on kids and adults. We'll touch on that a little bit as well. There's a number of definitions around about bullying. This is one. This one happens to come from the Department of Human Health and Human Services for the United States. And as you're going to see, it talks about power imbalance. Now, just a little side note, I think I saw when I scanned through this yesterday 3 typos. So there's going to be a quiz at the end to see if you noted all 3, okay? There's 3 types of bullying: verbal bullying, social bullying, and physical bullying. And most of us, when we think of bullying, we think of the physical part. And certainly that's very damaging for individuals. But we also want to think about the other 2 types as well, because they're the ones I think that are definitely on the increase, probably because of cyberspace and social media. Verbal bullying can be just as harmful. We're going to talk about that. Actually, it can be as harmful as the physical. And we've got some evidence to prove that. One of the things, when I was looking over the definition for verbal bullying, I wondered how many people wrestle with the issue of, when does teasing, which we've all had done to us and have probably done to others, when does it cross the line and turn into taunting or bullying? And I'm sure if you're associated with a school, you've wrestled some with that issue. Just thinking about that, one of the things that I use with the kids that I work with is kind of a line to cross or not to cross. Involves if someone asks you to stop, stop. So when I was looking over some of the literature for this, one of the things I found was that an article about bullying going on within families. So you have an older sibling bullying a younger sibling with just as much damage being done as it came from a peer group outside, okay? And working with siblings a lot in my office, that's one of the things you try to teach them is to respect the request to stop. And when you cross that, that's when you start to get into difficulty. The other thing I found when I looked at the distinctions with that, they started talking about intent. What's your intent? If my intent in teasing you is to have humor and to enjoy a laugh with you, that's not bullying and it's not taunting. But if my intent is to put you down and to maybe hurt you or hurt your feelings, then that's something else as well. So verbal bullying can be just as harmful. Social bullying involves some relationships, reputation, embarrassing, etc. And that's where social media and cyberspace has really increased probably the frequency of that. Physical, I think, doesn't need much explanation for that. One of the things I wanted to talk about with regards to the social bullying, I did, just as a note, I had an individual that I've been working with, a middle school student, who I saw as he came out of the hospital. He'd been hospitalized for a suicide attempt. As I got to know him, the catalyst for that was he had come out to two of his friends that he was gay. And naively, as a lot of middle school students are, he assumed that was going to stay a secret. Well, as we know, that doesn't happen much in middle school. It didn't stay a secret. Some other individuals who had access then to that information started the rumors on social media that were very damaging, much more than just coming out of the closet. These were rumors that they'd manufactured. And that then resulted in his suicide attempt. Now, as it turns out, and one of the things you'll want to learn from me this morning, that individual actually has another mental health issue. So the bullying as a single factor didn't cause the suicide attempt. But this individual was dealing with a mood issue that then got compounded by the bullying. And a lot of times, I think that's what we're finding. And lots of times we like to look for single causal issues because that really makes it much less complex for us to deal with. But in actuality, a lot of these situations have multiple causes. Silver lining in that cloud was it got properly diagnosed, properly treated, and the individual's doing a lot better. So it's nice to have a positive outcome from something that was very ugly when it occurred. Okay, when does it happen and where does it happen? Well, when I started looking at this, I thought I guess when I started practice, I thought most bullying is going to occur in what I term unstructured situations. It's the locker room, it's recess, it's in middle school, the hallways. And indeed it occurs there. But there's some research that says that the majority of it occurs in the classroom, in a school setting. And that was surprising to me, but then in my practice, as I've asked individuals who have been victims of bullying, I found out indeed it does happen in the classroom. Of course, the first question you go, well, where's the teacher? Well, the teacher had actually stepped out for a moment. And actually a moment is all that it takes, unfortunately. And so it becomes a very difficult problem because the teachers are not going to be in there 100% of the time. They can't be. They can't be in the hallways 100% of the time. So one of the things we're going to learn today is we've got to get to the kids and we've got to make a change with them. When you survey teachers with regards to how big a problem bullying is in the school, you're going to get one percentage. If you interview the kids, what research says, you get a much higher percentage, okay? Now, where does the truth lie? Probably somewhere in between would be my guess, but probably higher than the teachers realize. One of the things you find when you look at where and when it happens, if there could be a theme line to that, I would say it's when the authority figure is either not present or not watching, not observant. And that may be a theme line for where and when it happens. Frequency. 2 federally collected data on youth, one from 2011, the other from 2009. Grades 9 through 12, you were looking at about a 20%. And grades 6 through 12, which was another study, you're looking at 28%. When you look at the literature, you're going to find anywhere from 20% up to 33%. And some people who write in the field will talk about a third of our kids having to deal with bullying. So it's a significant percentage of our population that's dealing with this issue. Middle school, now you notice the difference between these two statistics. One included the middle school age range, okay? The other one did not. If you just survey middle school kids, there's one article I read that they gave it a 50% hit rate that had been bullied in middle school. 70% reported that it was a very big problem in their school. So what you do see is, I think as you get older, the frequency probably goes down. So high school is a little less than middle school. But middle school, if you think about it, is a time when all these kids are trying to find their social niche. They're really trying to fit in. They're trying to find their group. So for a lot of reasons, it's a much more vulnerable time. I'm just going to touch on this briefly, but I ran across this information. So it stops after you get out of school, right? Yeah. If you'll note this comes from an article in the Wall Street Journal this year. It was in March 2013. 50% of American workers, and the N is 1,000. That's a pretty good size group to be looking at. And gives it some power. Had been bullied in the office. Verbal abuse, job sabotage, misuse of authority, destruction of relationships. It can increase the risk of physical and mental health problems as well as professional injury. So when we think of this, it's not just a child and adolescent problem that we're dealing with. These behavior patterns, if they probably started in that age group, and they probably have persisted over time. There's a number of myths surrounding bullying. This is one, okay? What's the reality? The reality is verbal abuse from parents damages psychological functioning as much as physical abuse from parents does, and verbal and emotional abuse from peers is as damaging as verbal and emotional abuse from the parents. This comes from a study by Martin Teicher, T-E-I-C-H-E-R. He's a neuroscientist in Boston. What he did was he did MRI studies, and he found that older children persistently verbally bullied by peers at school showed the same brain function abnormalities as kids who had been physically harmed in that environment. So one of the things I'm going to link today for you is that the research now is growing that we're finding functional abnormalities, and we'll talk about in the brain as a result of maltreatment or bullying and abuse. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about another brain factor a little later. The children who had been verbally abused were more showing a higher incidence of depression, anxiety, hostility, and drug abuse at a later age. They also had worse verbal memory, and their academic performance was down. So if you've got weak verbal memory, that means you're not holding it well in a short-term memory store. If you can't do that for a length of time, it's very difficult to information encoded in long-term memory. And so then, therefore, your academic performance is likely to go down. So the reality. Words from peers can make an indelible imprint on the developing child and adolescent brain. Bullying is a type of childhood maltreatment. So, you know, the other myth that we could talk about, but I think the fact that you're here kind of dispels that, but the myth that exists out there that this is just something that kids have to deal with. It's just something that kids have to learn how to cope with and get past. Well, what we're finding is there's a large number of our kids who don't, and it does create lasting damage in many respects. Okay. As Nancy and I were in preparation for our symposium on March 9th, there was a third grade teacher that approached us, middle-aged lady, who clearly indicated to us that she was bullied in third grade, and that the scars she bore today. So she thinks about it often, and it has had a tremendous impact on her life. Now, she didn't tell us that to get sympathy or empathy from us. She told us that clearly so that we would realize the importance of the work that we're doing regarding the prevention of bullying. She wanted us to know that. Should be glad that it got mentioned today, by the way. All right. So who gets bullied? Who are these individuals? I've listed just some. The neurodevelopmentally disordered, autism spectrum individuals, those would be your Asperger students. How many of you are familiar with Asperger's in here? Oh, wonderful. Okay. ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disordered, LD, learning disabled. Your resource room kids, the kids that are getting special education services delivered to them through a resource room setting. What that does is it separates them from the mainstream, and if so, then they're more easily identified and can be targets. It's unfortunate because the resource room is a wonderful way to deliver services for them, but it does have that cost side to it. Obviously, our LGBT youth, overweight, short, actually anyone who looks and acts differently. One of the reasons I think we're all concerned is because I think the realizations is setting in, especially with social media, that it can be any of our kids at any point in time. This summer, do you think there's some 3 a.m. texting going on between teenagers? And, you know, any time it could occur. Okay. You know, there's no single factor that puts a child at risk of being bullied. So, again, it's not like research-wise we can narrow it down to one particular issue. It's going to be a multi-factored equation. And obviously it can happen anywhere, and as we just finished talking, anytime. What are the risk factors? Well, some groups, another risk factor to think about, some groups are at greater risk. The LGBT youth, does everybody know that terminology? Those individuals are at greater risk, and I think we all can understand that. But the research, Indiana Youth Institute, who does wonderful work here in Indiana, they did it in 2009. They were surveying that group. They came back, and 90% of those individuals had been bullied. 90%. So it kind of comes with the territory if you're going to make that public. And so if you think about that's huge. 50% have been physically bullied. So half of them are, you know, it's a 50-50 chance if you come out that you're going to get some physical bullying. So obviously an at-risk group. So we talked about groups. Let's talk about some individual factors that are related to bullying. kids that are perceived as different from their peers, and and that's why it's concerning to all of us, because we recognize anything could make us look different on one particular day in middle school. Wearing glasses, different clothing, etc. Perceived as weak, unable to defend themselves. The Asperger's, and a lot of you are familiar with Asperger's, those individuals obviously are at great risk because social is so difficult for them. If you think of the autism spectrum, what the uniting factor for the different groups that are on the autism spectrum, whether it's Rett's disorder, whether it's autism, whether it's Asperger's, etc., is social difficulties, significant social difficulties. And the way I describe it to parents in my office who are just beginning to wrap their minds around Asperger's is I tell them to think about a social learning disability. So if you got a student who's dyslexic and he's having difficulty learning to read, he can't learn to read, but he needs a targeted instructional approach, and it'll have to be direct onto the reading. So if you got an Asperger student, they can learn social, but they have to learn it by direct instruction and practice, because they don't intuit it. It doesn't come naturally for them, okay? Most of us, you think about how we learn social skills, we watched our brother, we watched our sister, we learned it on the playground, we learned it in the backyard, we learned it in the neighborhood, a lot by observation and just figuring it out, trial and error. These kids don't figure it out that way. They have to have a direct instructional approach. So let's talk about a target group for bullying. The other thing for them is they are not style conscious. So it's interesting, you walk into my waiting room at times and you can spot them because they're not concerned about how they appear. And they'll wear the same pair of sweatpants every day for a week if mom had let them, okay? And matching stripes with plaid, not a problem. If it fits and if it feels good. You know, a lot of them are tactically defensive, so if they find something that feels right, they're not changing it very easy. So, you know, my ADHD kids, I see a lot of ADHD kids, and I'm sure each of you do too, who are involved with working with kids. These kids are also a target group because if you've got a significant ADHD kid in elementary school, in other words, he's got fairly significant symptoms, he's impulsive and he's hyper. That can be annoying if you're around that for very long. Okay, got some teachers in the audience? Okay, we got some heads nodding. Oh yeah. And so they're a target because they're annoying. And you know, and kids get tired of that after a while, okay? The other thing is they're impulsive, and so they don't think before they act. So a lot of times they'll do something that even they will say afterwards, yeah, that was kind of dumb, wasn't it? Well, you do dumb things, you're going to set yourself up to be a target for bullying. The other thing they do is, with their impulsivity, they're reactive. So if you're going to tease somebody, what are you after? A lot of times you're after a reaction, and they are reactive. That impulse to, as many times as you've told them, you know, ignore it, yeah, they have a hard time doing it. So they're a target group too. But anything that makes you different can make you a target. Okay. We've covered that. Just by the way, just because you have these risk factors doesn't mean you'll be bullied. Now, who are the ones that are doing the bullying? There's that group that's pretty well connected, have popularity. So in other words, they already have some social power and some social control. You got another group that's not doing as well. Could be low self-esteem, anxious, depressed, less involved. They're after some social status or some social power or social control. So you see both groups can end up being being bullies. One of the things I learned, I was involved in a leadership training a number of years ago, and there was a pretty large group. It was probably about 50 of us, 49 to 50 of us. And the first day, it went on for a while. The first day, I was surprised. There were two individuals that really stood out, that really stepped up to lead the group, okay? And I thought, well, what are they doing here? They don't need this training. They're already leaders. I mean, look at them. They're chomping at the bit. Later on, as I got them to know us and we went through the process, what I found out, both of them, not in the same words, but essentially both of them admitted they had to be the ones in control. They couldn't let someone else be in control. So why were they so eager to get up and be the leader? It was a control need. And of course, their challenge then in the process was to learn to be comfortable and let someone else be in control. And that was difficult for them to do. And we can trace that back to all kinds of things in their childhood and, and why that is, okay? So I remember that when I'm dealing with bullies, is to look to see, is this just really a control need? And then why is that? Okay. Here are some factors that are going into kids who bully more. Aggressive, easily frustrated, having issues at home, think badly of others, difficulty following rules, view violence in a positive way, have friends who bully others, so it's been modeled for them, okay? I had an 8th grader, actually he was a 7th grader at the time, that came to see me, and parents brought him, but also probation encouraged that he come see someone, not necessarily me. And turns out he had put a kid in the hospital with one punch to the face, and this was a big kid. This was a 7th grader. He's an 8th grader now. He probably goes 240, and not much fat on him. And he's a little bit taller than I am, so he's kind of just square, big guy. And I thought, well, okay, is he a bully? What's this all about? The reason the reason they came to see me, really, the probation officer and the police officers were very concerned that when they talked with this young man, they got no sign of remorse. He put a kid in the hospital, yet he was showing no empathy. And so that popped their way up on their radar screens, appropriately so. And so they were really strongly encouraging then for him to get in to see some therapy. And even the police officers talked to the parents about it because they concerned them so. Well, as it turns out, in this case, another good outcome, turns out for this individual, having a lot of issues at home in his family, parental divorce, a lot of stressors, alcoholism, etc. So once we identified those issues and could deal with them and help him deal with them, what you found was an individual who did have empathy, who did care, okay? Now, he was still upset at that kid because that kid had teased him unmercifully. And that kid, by the way, did not stop when this kid had requested him to. So there was that, obey that, please stop, and he didn't. So anyway, good outcome, really, because the kid's doing relatively well now, and he wants to be a psychologist. So I think that's a good sign. All right. All right, children more likely to bully others. That first statement is really true, and I've seen that in my office, and maybe you've seen it as well. Size does not matter. I've seen these kids that are getting bullied, and I look at them and I go, if I was a classmate of him, there's no way I'd bully. He could break me in half. What is that? Well, popularity, strength, cognitive ability, those are the things that empower them, and so it's not always just physical size, okay? Ever have any friends who are very quick verbally? I've got one friend who, it just happens to be a gift for him. Well, he speaks 5 languages, so you can get a sense of his verbal abilities. But I would no more engage in any kind of verbal banter with him, but if he wanted to bully you verbally, he could do that really easily, you know. And he could do it with me, and I wouldn't have a chance. Fortunately, he's a friend, so I don't have to worry about it. Children who bully may have more than one of these characteristics. You know, I had just to give you another quick example, I had an individual, another middle school student. You notice how that keeps popping up here. This young man was tall, an athlete, in fact, a superb athlete. He's one of those guys that just has natural athleticism. He picks up a ball, he picks up a racket, he's on the top tier right away out of the gate. And good-looking young man. So he had friends, both guy friends, he had girls that were friends of his and interested in him. And smart, A student, you know, he got bullied unmercifully. We had to take him out of school and switch to another school. What was that all about? Well, turns out he's an anxious, reactive kid. And I actually think the bullying probably started, I think the other kids were jealous of him, the guys, and I think they started teasing, and then I think they quickly figured out that underneath that exterior of his that looks so good and looks cool, there's emotional reactivity and anxiety. And they did not let up. And they eventually he eventually left that school, which was the best thing that could happen for him. Okay. I don't know where I need to point this, but I'm figuring it out, I guess. Okay. Effects of bullying. Let's talk about that. It can affect everyone, by the way, as we talked earlier. I did have a kid, by the way. I'm trying to think of his middle school again. I think he was a 6th grader. Big kid, come in to see me, was refusing to go to school. And so, you know, you sorted through those issues, and what you found was that he was not being bullied, which was my original hypothesis. He had witnessed bullying. He'd witnessed it on the bus. And it had so traumatized him that he wouldn't ride the bus, and then and then later on that anxiety then transferred to school, and he wouldn't attend school. So the witnesses for these events can also be badly scarred by these. Bullying is linked to many negative outcomes, impacts on mental health. We're talking about physical health, substance use, suicide. The point I want to make here is it's important to talk to the kids, is that bottom line. You have to pose the question. It's kind of like sexual abuse. If you're going to find out a kid's sexually abused, you got to pose the question. They don't come to you and tell you that's happening. It's the same with bullying, for the most part. I mean, I'm sure there's that percentage of kids that will come home and say, Mom, Dad, this kid's bullying me at school. But a lot of these kids will not. So if you're concerned about it, you've got to inquire. You've got to ask directly to get the answer. Effects. This is pretty congruent with what we see in our office. We see a lot of the internalizing problems and withdrawn, depression, anxious. Anxiety and depression are probably at the top of the list in terms of what we're getting, but we see all of it. What's a hallmark symptom of an adolescent who's dealing with depression? Is it withdrawn or angry, irritable? Adolescents get angry and irritable when they're depressed. I mean, they can be angry and irritable anyway. I mean, they're adolescents, but if they're getting bullied, it goes up, okay? You know, so one of the things you're watching for is, are you getting a sudden onset of these symptoms? Well, that's a flag, okay? But, you know, I've seen cases where it's a much insidious onset, too. And so in other words, the teasing wears them down over time. And eventually they get depressed, you know. So it wasn't a sudden onset. So I've seen it both ways. Kids who are bullied, negative physical, school, and mental health issues. There's another typo here. Does anybody want to take a guess? It's 1990s, not 1900s. That make a little more sense? Okay. Now obviously those are the cases that get a lot of publicity, worries all of us, scares us to death, scares all the kids, okay? You get kids who won't go to school, you know, because of something that's occurred and they saw it in the media coverage. This is another one where you have to be careful of the single cause. And I haven't done the research on all the shooters, but my sense is it'll be multiple causes, of which the bullying is one, okay? I did have a kid last week that I was seeing who had multiple issues going on with him. It was an elementary school student who and bullying was just a side note, but he had taken a steak knife to school to scare the bully. And so then, you know, we got the spin-off, we had to deal with that. And that was not the referral question, that was not why I was there. Kids who are bullied, they're more likely to experience depression, anxiety, sadness, loneliness. Health complaints, you hear a lot of somatic complaints from kids who are being bullied. In other words, you know, that's the anxiety creeping in, and we'll talk a little more about that. You get depressed academic performance, and you know, that's damaging as well. And here's probably the mechanism that I see anyway, transfer in my office. If anxiety goes up or depressive symptoms go up, the ability to attend and focus goes south. If you're not focused, you can't get information encoded in long-term memory. So then your academic performance suffers. Now your motivation can get messed with as well, but that's another mechanism is it goes through the attention channel. And the research is showing that, again, that memory and verbal memory go down. Thank you. All right, kids who bully. Well, what we're finding is, you know, they're at risk too. They're at risk for a variety of things, and they're more likely to abuse alcohol and other drugs in adolescence as adults. They get into fights, they vandalize, etc. Those are the kids that go on to get into the legal system with conduct disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, and antisocial personality disorders. You intervene to help them, but you also intervene so that they don't victimize others. And then society's cost, if you think about it, if you intervene appropriately, goes down as well. Bystanders, kids who witness this are more likely to have increased. Why would that first one be? Why is tobacco and alcohol going up with a bystander? Well, if they're anxious, what you find is they'll use substances more. And they can get hooked on substances if you're dealing with anxiety. It's easy to do. Depression, anxiety, they miss or skip school, which is the example I gave you earlier. Now, the bullying can short-circuit normal brain development during windows of vulnerability. And we know that because research on physical and sexual abuse has told us that. And so this isn't any different. There's no clear line between the type of maltreatment you experience and the neurobiological changes that can occur. Does bullying cause structural and functional brain changes? The research is accumulating that it does, both the function, which you would get from a PET scan study, but also now they're showing structural changes as well. And so that just amps it up. We've all known about the emotional toll and emotional cost. Well, now we're finding that there's other damage being done as well. How does that work? Well, if you activate, you know, if you're being bullied, your hormone levels are going up, your adrenaline's getting pumped out, you're in a stress situation, you're getting a fight or flight response going. There's a lot going on in your system. And you do that over time, and there's going to be some changes. And this is one of the mechanisms that they've uncovered. You get bullied, cortisol is a hormone that gets released. If you get enough of that released over a period of time, there's potential for damage, neuron death in the hippocampus, which will lead to poor memory, and there that memory thing is, again, popping up. And then you get poor academic performance. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I thought it was something that you needed to know about. How many are familiar with epigenetics? It's an interesting area as well. It's when genes are turned on and off, and they're finding that stress could do that, but that's a whole nother presentation. So childhood maltreatment, we talked about the symptoms. Here's some of the diagnoses that go up and that would occur in our office as a result of maltreatment. I'm going to go a little quicker because I'm running out of time, and Christina's keeping me on task. Increased incidence of physical symptoms. IBS is irritable bowel syndrome, which we see kids coming into our office who've had GI workups, a couple of them, nothing, can't find anything wrong, or having horrible bowel and digestive system issues. Underneath that, what do we find? Anxiety. Anxiety will crank that whole system up, and you'll have physical problems. The other thing I wanted you to be aware of is the research tells us, this Copeland has done an excellent study, Journal of American Medical Association, and what he's showing is that the damage that's done goes on into adulthood. He's clearly demonstrating that, okay? So it's not a short-run phenomenon. One other comment real quick about suicide is the research is clear. Victims and perpetrators are at greater risk for suicide. And the biggest risk are the individuals who are both victims and then go on to be bullies and are perpetrators. Those individuals are at the greatest risk, not only for mental illness down the road, but for suicide as well. And girls are a little more vulnerable than the guys, but it cuts across sexes. I'll give you this information if you email me, but here's the key take-home points I wanted you to have. And there's no doubt that we've got to go about creating this for multiple reasons, some of which I've given you today. And I think this, in my humble opinion, this is how you go about it. Thank you.